Ankit Patel, how you been?
I've been well, Steve. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's great to see you. I was in your office a few weeks ago as a guest, not a patient, and we I got to see firsthand how you are using AI in your practice to improve several areas of the practice operations, really reshaping a lot of the things that business owners, practice owners have traditionally done. And you're doing quite a bit of it. So I appreciate you having me in. It was really interesting. And then after we talked, we thought it'd make a good podcast episode. So we'll get into the specifics of that a little bit more, but maybe just to lead off with, can you give the listeners here maybe a high level overview of how you're using AI in your practice?
Yeah, it's uh so I'll classify it at different levels. And most of today what we're going to talk about is going to be at the basic level. But there's also things that are very advanced and more integrated that require some development work. So we're doing things across the board, all the way from basics to requiring development work. And so um, the easy way to say how we are implementing it is we look at all the problems we're facing and challenges, and we figure out, well, can we do it better or faster or cheaper with AI? And we try to figure out a solution with that. And that's how we kind of introduce it to our offices. And so it's really been good, we find, with everything from hiring, even like sifting through lots of data for us, like a lot of resumes, helping create maybe some assessments and quizzes, and how do we, help people learn faster. It's also been helpful for training, coaching, and feedback. But we've also used it for things like we have an AI voice agent too that answers phones for us occasionally, like after hours, to make appointments. And so we've gotten down that rabbit hole as well. So we use it across a lot of different ways.
It's an interesting that you mentioned the problem aspect, and I think that's a good place for a lot of ODs to look is what kind of problems could potentially be solved by AI. Are there any particular areas that you've seen the greatest benefit?
Yeah, I think training and development and hiring, mainly because it's been easiest to deploy there. The other area I think sometimes I forget about it because it's so obvious is marketing, creating content or rewriting posts or making posts sound better. Just helping with that, you can do a lot of partial or full automation with that side as well.
I'll give you a quick story. As you mentioned the hiring process, I'd like to dig into that a little bit more because that's
Yes.
obviously a pain point for a lot of ODs. So, in my consulting role, I get asked to look at a lot of job ads and tweak them. Sometimes I've written them for other clients, and I decided to implement AI, which I had never done before. So I just asked this client to send me almost like a bullet point list of all the different things that they required for this position. And I took it and I threw it into AI and I prompted it and I said, give me a job ad based on these criteria. And it kicked out a job ad and I sent it back to the doctor. And the reply I got back was three words: wow, 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 with multiple exclamation parts after each one. So now on Kit, I've got tremendous imposter syndrome because I didn't actually write the ad. So I did come clean and I said, I will tell you that I didn't write this. I plugged this into AI, but I agree. It's way better than I could have written. I found myself becoming less apologetic about
Mm.
the use of AI, even in my role in consulting, when I feel it's something that could enhance the something with the members practice. And I've actually found myself doing more coaching for the clients to show them how they could utilize AI. And I think that's a great place to look is what are the
Yeah.
problems that we're having? Is there anything you've found with what you've used it for where you said AI is not a great solution for this?
There's a lot. So it depends on what you're trying to do with it. So it's really good at, so the way AI works, if you don't know, it's not anything magic. It's basically data plus math, and it gets an output. And the recent buzz around AI has been around large language models. And effectively, what they do is they're a next word predictor. So if you think, in Google, you type something in, and then all of a sudden it says it fills out the rest automatically. It's like, what is the temperature in, and then it might fill out your local city that you're in. It might say Marietta, Georgia, or Atlanta, Georgia, right? And it's a grayed out. So it predicts the next word. And that's how the ChatGPT, Claude, all these models, that's how they effectively work at a basic level. And so if you think about that, where, and by the way, this is changing, this year is going to be different. Currently, if you have access to models, there's only a couple of models that can do um, logical thinking, processing at really high, at a good level to where it's not making too many mistakes. And those models really, it depends on the use case, but they're very expensive and not really for, not yet at least, usable for most people. Um, so if you need something that's exact data, it's not great with. If there is like, I'll call it a one to N problem, like you have one question, but you can have multiple solutions, like, hey, give me a good job ad. There's no necessarily, there's better answers than others, but there's not a wrong answer or right answer. It does great with things like that, especially with anything that's related to language. It does pretty well with creating things like assessments. It does great. Most models do a good job with taking in a lot of data and kind of analyzing it from a text perspective, not from a numbers perspective. It doesn't do numbers well. And so if you're going to put in your financials into it and say, give me some insights, it has a hard time doing that. You kind of have to make it work a little bit to do that. But those are the biggest areas are if you need some human discernment, that's usually a great place for AI to be introduced. Um, if it's not a specific convergent solution that you need every time, right? But if it's something that's a little bit more qualitative than quantitative, it does a great job.
If we could stay on the staffing topic, once you've hired somebody, so you're using it for things like job ads, I'd be curious to know, Ed, more specific how you're using it for hiring, but also perhaps a part B to this question. Once you've hired people, I'm curious how you're using it for staff training and development.
Yeah, so we do a couple different sides, so I could talk a lot for that whole journey. So I'll start from the beginning of it. So first step is we have to write a job ad, and what we do first is we figure out what is the psychology of the person that we need in this job. So we'll go. So what I recommend for everyone, unless you're a little more advanced, the easiest way to go for this particular workflow is go to claude.com, CLAUDE.com, or and they have a model called Claude. Anthropic is the name of the company, but the model Claude is, well, let me make sure I told you right on that. Let me just double check. Yeah, Claude.ai, CLAUDE.ai. And that's the model that they have. And that one is get the paid membership. It's $20 a month because that model that's paid is called Sonnet 3.5. As of January 2025, it's probably the best bang for your buck in terms of what you get in output, especially when it comes to writing. And so when you go in there, what you'll do is you'll start. You can use it as a consultant too. I know Steve, you may not want to hear this too much because it kind of impedes on your side, but so you can say like, hey, I'm trying to create a job ad. I'm an optometrist. I own this practice. This is my practice size and scope. I'm looking for this type of person that does this. They're an optician, but I need them to be detail oriented, but also really friendly with patients. And here's what I need them to do as far as a job function. Even if you have a job description, I would put that in there too. And at the very end, I would say, ask me any clarifying questions if you need to before you create a job posting or job ad for us. And then it might ask you some questions that if you know the answer, you answer, and it'll output your job ad for you in the language that will be attractive to the type of person that you want. So we'll typically use it to say, hey, give me, this is the type of things I need this person to do as an optician. Tell me the types of psychological traits I really want to see in this person. And they would tell me that. Then I would say, okay, now that you know the psychological traits, you know the job function, create a job ad that speaks to someone with this type of psychology that will speak to them. So, for instance, if you need them to be detail oriented, you'll put a lot of details in the job ad. It'll do that. If you want someone who's more just about speed and closing deals, it'll make it much more small. It'll talk more about the upside of the sales process. So if you want an optician that can sell, you talk about how much money they can make. If you want an optician that's super detailed and dots every T, dots the I's, crosses the T's, it'll tell it all the little details. It'll even ask you to break down like, hey, what are the job roles? Like, what does a day to day look like? And put that in the job ad as well. So the idea is not necessarily attract the people you want, but detract the people you don't want. And it's really good at doing it and writing in a way that works there. And Next step, what you can do is as resumes come in, you can take the resumes, you can take the job ad and start a new conversation. Say remove the names and contact information just for safety reasons, but upload the job experience. Say, hey, this person is applying to this job. Give me a scoring of how well do you think they would do on this job, 0 to 100, and tell me where you think they'll be strong, where they'll be weak, and then generate behavior-based questions that I could use to interview them based off their work experience and the job functions. And it'll spit out to you, here's a grade, here's where they're strong, here's where they're weak, here's questions that you'll want to ask them in the job interview if you decide to interview them. And that's super helpful, by the way. That takes away a lot of the guesswork, and you'll find things. And if they can't answer those questions very well, those are probably areas that you really want to consider. Do you want to keep this? Do you really want to hire this person or not? So it helps avoid some potential bad hires there. Um, and the next step after that, once they come on board, then we can use it for training and development. So we use it, our leadership team uses it to help create some of this, right? Say, hey, here's the person, help me come up with a 90-day plan for an optician that needs to do these things. And then we'll work with it a little bit and we'll go back and forth and say, okay, now that we have this, come up with weekly assessments for it, right? And then, and by the way, you may not be able to do this all in one single conversation. You may have to break it up in parts. So if you ask, one conversation might be come up with a 90-day development plan and what they should be learning each week. And then the next one, you take each individual week and create its own conversation and say, I need a more detailed plan of what they can do, what they can learn, and an assessment at the end of the week. And so you might have like 13 different chats, one for each week to figure out how you deploy each week. And then you have a 90-day rant plan for someone, and then you have assessments for them to take at the end of each week. We do something else too. We have other models that let us actually tie it all in together and say do super assessments as you go along the way to kind of assess other stuff too. But just to get started, that's a great way to start. And so it helps create it. And now what you do is you just put them through the program and they can just take the assessments and you can even score it too. You can set up like Google Forms to do this for free if you have a Google account. And it can do the scoring and do all that. So it gives you a plan of how to develop people. And it's a nice objective way of doing that. And then, like, hey, you're supposed to do this work. Here's the plan. Either you do it or you don't. If you did it, great. If you didn't, we have to have a conversation of why. Does that help a little bit for that perspective?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And for someone who is new to ChatGPT, well, let's go back to where you started on that. We don't have to really get into the weeds on this, but something that I think is really important to get the most out of it, even at a basic level, get comfortable with the word prompting, because so much of it is the magic of AI is in the prompt and giving. It's not just Google where you kind of look something up and it gives you an answer. AI is very influenced by context and details. So understanding, and again, we won't get into it on this episode, but I would take some time if you really want to lean into AI and better understanding how to write a good prompt, because the more context and the more detail you give it on the front end, the better responses that you're going to get on the back end. And it's really an interesting application of it is in the hiring and interviewing, because you mentioned the term guesswork. And I think a lot of times that is what we're doing when we're hiring somebody is we're looking at their resume and everybody's a rock star on their resume and everybody puts, their best face onto when they show up for an interview, but it's still a lot of guesswork that goes into that. So I think it can be a tremendous resource to help you better identify and increase the probability of getting a better hire.
Got it. Yeah, I think, and by the way, it's still not perfect, but it makes it a lot easier, right? You might go from 90% to 90% wrong or 10% right on your hires to maybe 40% or even 50% higher, better with using these tools.
Yeah.
So
It's interesting you use that data because I've actually seen data showing that when hiring, only about 10% of the time do we get the person we think we're getting, right? So you're interviewing somebody again, the resume looks great, they show up, they interview well, and then a month or two in, this is just not the person you thought you were hiring. It's a very low percentage actually of looking at a candidate that we've interviewed that we like, and that's a really poor correlation with actually how they're going to show up for the job. Becoming a better interview increases your odds, but it's no perfect science. And then again, when you throw AI in the mix, I think it just gives you another resource to improve the odds. Like you said, it's there's no guarantees there.
You still have to have domain expertise, which is the downside, right? So you still have to know what to ask. Like I think I mentioned, ask for behavior-based questions, right? Those are
Hmm.
questions that are specific. Give me examples when you did this, not how you would hypothetically do this. Because if they don't have examples of how they've done something, then because past success predicts future success. And so that might be a potential issue. The other thing too is knowing hey, I want you to look at average time in job because that's important too. If they're only in a job for 3 months, that's not really someone, even though they look great on paper, every 3 months is something that an AI necessarily won't pick up unless you know to ask for that. So there's certain things that you just kind of have to know about. But what you can ask AI is, hey, you're an expert. You can tell it to take a role in the prompt. Tell it you're an expert hiring manager at a world-class optometry office. Give me all the variables and factors I should look at in a resume that would make it look good. Give me how I should conduct my interview process and what type of questions and how I should ask and if what am I missing here. And you can use it as a coach to kind of talk through that first. And then you use that information you learn to create the new prompt that helps you execute against that. So that's actually not a bad way of using it. Again, it's still not perfect. It still helps to have some domain expertise, but it'll at least open up some blind spots you may have had that you didn't know you had.
The Now that you've got AI replacing me as a consultant, in all kidding aside, do you have staff that ever worry about being replaced? Because I had this conversation with somebody else who is actually using a virtual assistant, and his response was, and I know you've got some experience in that world as well, not specifically with virtual assistants, but his response was, I got in front of that because he said, I actually did not want to replace anybody. I was comfortable with the team I had. I went to them and said, what can I take off your plate? And then they embraced it after that. They were hesitant in the beginning, but when they understood I wasn't trying to replace them. But with the use of AI, has that been an issue in your office at all?
So no, not with the use of AI because it hasn't really replaced anyone necessarily in the offices. It's really made things easier where a lot of smaller offices, especially, actually most offices, usually, you don't need two people, you don't need three people, you don't need four people, you need like two and a half or three and a half if you really were staffed properly. So you end up being a little overstaffed or understaffed. AI helps you get rid of that decimal point of a person you may need, right? To help with some things, streamline some things. It can help there. But you really that's more of the more complex implementation of AI because there's a lot of things you have to consider there. But it can help with that. Will AI take everyone's job? It's too early to say, but maybe I don't know. Right? I can't predict the future, but it's getting pretty darn good. You joked about the consulting, but there are models right now that I use that they're not cheap, but they're quite frankly they're better than a lot of consultants I've dealt with. And I used to be in consulting myself, but and it's not necessarily the best consultant at everything, but it's above average or average at everything. And so if I don't know anything about a topic, it gets me to average. And if that's good enough for what I need, that's good enough. I don't need anything more. So for instance, it's actually right now it's a $200 model for ChatGPT called ChatGPT Pro is what I pay for. And it's $200 a month. It's not cheap, but I've been experimenting with it and it does a great job. If I ask it to do something like, hey, I want you to pretend to be a CFO for this company, give me all the reports I need on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual, create the SOPs, create metrics I need, who does what. And it just does that for you in like one shot because it's like one of those, it's a new model. It's a different way of working, but it's getting pretty darn good. But I think you're going to see replacement there first over like a tech or optician, quite honestly. We're using it a little bit to make appointments with phones. It's still okay, right? It still doesn't beat an experience of someone talking and having making the patient laugh while they're on the phone. So it just depends on what kind of experience you're going for. If you're a high volume, low margin office, you might be incentivized to run AI more, especially with some repetitive tasks like appointment making, recalls, things like that. But if you're a more high touch facility, then it may not make much sense. People may really want to talk to someone or see someone in person. So I don't know how that's going to go. It's usually more about virtual assistants or global staffing where people worry. But same thing there. It's like, hey, you know what? We're making your job easier. We're going to teach you how to use this and be more productive. And that's how we're treating it as, hey, we're giving you a calculator when you're using a slide ruler before.
Yeah, I don't know what the world is going to look like in 10 or 20 years, but I think there's the upside right now is really promising. And for the doctors who have a lot of reservations about this, I get it. I mean, it's new, it's scary, it is, but at the same time, if we just put to the side for a minute the unknown, the uncertainties, and they're out there, they're worth considering. Like I said, I don't know, 20 years from now, AI turns into this overlord that tries to take over the world, and but when you're looking at what's happening right now on the clinical side and the way the upside and the opportunity in enhancing our ability to better diagnose and treat patients, but also in my world from the practice management side, when you hear over and over from doctors who are burdened with a lot of the administrative tasks, some of the things that we're talking about, what if you could take those things away? And there were systems in place, perhaps driven by AI, that allowed doctors to spend more time with patients. That's a good thing. And that's where I see in the short term anyway, an incredible amount of upside in a doctor's ability to do multiple things, treat patients better clinically, operate their practice better, but also perhaps show up to work into the kind of practice that they want to be doing and not feel so burdened and overwhelmed with all the administrative tasks. So if you could unload some of uh, these other tasks that AI could take on, I think it leads to so many improvements along the way.
One thing I do want to mention that we haven't talked about, what AI does not do well yet, is architecture. So if you need to architect a solution, it's awful. It is not great. It might give you some insights on how to do it, but I have yet to see it do it on its own if you don't have some inside knowledge yourself. So in helping getting someone to help architect it is probably the step one if you want to take that route of alleviating some administrative burden. If you have a really small scope, a really small problem, like, hey, I want to write this blog post better, fantastic, one shot, get it done. But if you want, like, hey, how do I revamp my HR process so it's a lot smoother and I cleaner and it's more robust and automated, that you should probably bring someone in to help with that. And if folks want to reach out to me, I'd be happy to kind of talk through it. My background is in engineering, so before I was here working with my wife she's an OD and working in this space, I was doing work in manufacturing and healthcare systems, doing a lot of this stuff. So be happy to kind of talk through that with folks if they need any help.
One more area I'd like to get your feedback on, because I saw how you were implementing this in your practice or using it to create improvements, was through streamlining operations, and maybe more specifically, I know you use it for creating standard operating procedures, which can be a tedious task when you look at SOPs and policy manuals and those sorts of things. How are you using it in your practice?
That is a great use case. We actually use it for my business care team too, which is our company that helps with staffing for other optometry offices. Basically, we use AI to create a list of questions to ask about how to get a good conversation going via an interview, and then after we record the conversations, whether it's internal process or not, and then that conversation is converted to an SOP by AI. Again, Claude Sonnet 3.5 is right now, as of January 2025, is the best bang for your buck for something like this. So if you pay for that $20 subscription a month at Claude.ai, I don't get any money from them, but they're the best right now. Just use that one. You literally just upload the audio file or convert it to a transcript, then upload the transcript and say to convert this to SOP. It'll do that for you. And you can actually even use things like there's this thing called mermaid code, which is a way that computers understand workflow and process diagrams. So you can also say, hey, now convert this into a mermaid flow diagram. And you can Google them. There's a lot of free like mermaid chart apps where you just copy that code and it puts it into a visual diagram. So you can see the process flow and the process diagram right in front of you. So yes, SOPs are fantastic to do this with. Now, keep in mind though, if you're going to use the Claude model, it's still going to make mistakes. So you're going to have to go back over it, but it's going to save you 80, 90% of your work. All you have to do is review and just double check stuff and add stuff and enhance stuff where you want. versus having to write it all from scratch.
You bring an engineering background, so obviously most ODs don't have that. So you're probably going to be a little bit more familiar with some of these things as others. But if you're an OD listening to this and feeling overwhelmed with some of the technological aspects, would you agree with this that it, you don't need much of a background in technology to use it for a lot of the things that it could significantly improve operations? I would say one, just get started, get ChatGPT and just get started, play around with it, learn some of the basics. And secondly, some of the things you're mentioning are going to be obsolete in a month. It's going to be replaced. Right now is the worst version of AI we're ever going to see because it's going to be constantly iterating and getting better. So I would say you don't have to know every aspect of AI, but just stay current with it because there's going to be a lot of exciting apps and technology that come down the road that will continually get better and help you improve. But this is not something that I've found that you need a ton of experience in or any. Just, I would say just start with ChatGPT. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's a new technology. No one really has that much experience, right? Unless you've been working on machine learning models for 10, 15 years, you really don't have much experience with this. And even then, the new models, the large language models are a little bit different. Um, so yes, getting an account and just playing with it, wherever your curiosities take you. It's more about the process of learning and understanding versus executing, right? Like you got to develop that foundational knowledge first. It's hard for a tech to be a doctor, right? Because they don't have a lot of the foundational knowledge. Same concept there. Over time, you'll get that knowledge as you go through and learn, and you can start applying it differently. And so just like I use that example because as a tech, you probably, especially a very experienced tech, you can probably do a lot, but the doctors still have a little bit more insight and knowledge and how to actually apply the correct interventions for a patient, even though tech might get pretty darn close, right? And that's what I look at with AI, right? It's using AI is right now you're a brand new tech who's never been in the industry before that you're learning. You'll learn it, you'll play with it, you can take some classes on it, and as you get better, you'll get better and better in learning how to do it. And eventually, you may hit a gap, or you may actually, go to OD school and become a doctor with it too. So, just depends on where your curiosity takes you with it.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in it. I see it coming up over and over. I see more and more lectures at optometry events and conferences. I did read recently though that 90% of ODs have not even tried ChatGPT. So it also demonstrates that while there's an interest in it, there's a lot that haven't even tried it. So I think that's where that was coming from, just getting started on it, playing around with it. What about the future of AI? And as I'm asking that question, I feel like I almost need to preface it in the future, not necessarily being things that don't exist right now, but the future sometimes is just things that do exist. We just haven't done it yet. And I think we can agree collectively as the OD community isn't always the earliest adapters. You know, sometimes we wait and maybe wait a little bit too long for the world to change, and then we try to play catch up. But what do you see as the future possibilities, even if those things already exist? When we look at things like appointment scheduling, inventory management, scribing, there's AI based technology out there that already exists to do that. I don't think many ODs are necessarily using those things. But when you look into your crystal ball, what do you see as what the future practice looks like as it applies to AI?
Yeah, so I'll answer that a couple different ways. What I'll say is that uh, one, be careful with patient information in AI because this stuff is not locally stored. There is a possibility of data leaks, things like that. So try to be HIPAA compliant every time you use anything patient related with this. Where I see it going so like if you're using a scribe tool, right, just be wary of that tool and the security measures around it. Now, everything's already in the cloud anyways for most things, so most providers usually do provide something secure with that. But with as far as what the future holds, you know, I- we saw some things in December that were like, okay, we've hit an inflection point with the capabilities for AI. And so this year is, I think a lot of people are saying it, that called agents. So now instead of just a prompt, you type stuff in. Now you have bots that can go do certain things and they can coordinate with each other. And so it's going to become easier for someone with less experience to start implementing AI. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that this year. From a doctor perspective, like, hey, how is that? How does that work with the doctor and the actual medicine side? Now that there's going to be some things, regulatory reasons, regulatory things, but I mean, AI, it can do a lot of the functions doctors can do, sometimes better, sometimes not as good, depends on the job function. But I see that gap closing very rapidly. It's going to be really expensive at first, but it'll drop in price. And so whatever that looks like will be interesting to manage through that. And then, there's going to be a lot of what I'll say is at least the short term future for the next year, there's a lot of price competition with a bunch of vendors. So you'll start seeing pricing start creep up a little bit, but not a lot, not the true cost, right? So right now we're in a golden period. The actual cost to run this is way more than what they charge for it right now. And so these companies are running at a loss to try to get the business and own the market and be the one company that to rule them all kind of thing. And so just be wary of that, that the true cost of this is much higher than what we're seeing right now to run it.
Well, Ankit, thanks so much. And I appreciate you elaborating on a topic again. I think it's something that is starting to show up a lot more in our industry as far as the interest goes. And I think we'll see over the next couple of years a lot more offices utilizing it. And I think it's just going to become more ubiquitous, right? It's going to show up whether you're utilizing it or not. It's going to show up in the technology that we use in computers, a lot of the operational workflows. It already is. I think some people use it more than they even realize they use it, but I think it has a lot of potential. But there's red flags also. There's watch outs, and I think we need to be diligent, especially in an industry that works with sensitive patient data. So thanks for coming on and giving us a glimpse of where we're at now and where we might expect to go.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is fun. I think we could have this conversation in 2 weeks and it could be completely different because
Yeah,
of
it
how
could be.
fast
Maybe
this
we'll do
moves.
that. Yeah,
So
we'll make it a regular thing.
yeah,
And we probably will. We maybe not 2 weeks from now, but I'm sure we'll
yeah.
circle back and we'll laugh at this episode, how outdated it was 6 months ago or a year ago. I want to give you a minute to talk about the your company, My Business Care Team. We did a podcast episode on that a while back. If you're interested, go back and look for it. But if you just think it's a really interesting concept that you put together, go ahead and if you want to
Yeah.
share what that is.
No, I appreciate that. Thanks, Steve. So my business care team was founded because my wife and I had several locations here in Atlanta and had challenges with help. And so we started hiring people globally versus just in the four walls. Ended up being good at it, and people started asking us for help, and my business care team was formed. And so now we help optometrists and ophthalmologists with anything you can do remote, we can do. But we're not like a regular VA company. It's more like VA 2.0, or we call it integrated patient care services because we're really embedded with your team. We actually have managers, quality people, supervisors, trainers, training programs. We have our own infrastructure that we are able to use things like AI to help with quality management and training. So we put a lot of effort into making sure that the folks are doing the right job for the practices. And so versus a regular, most VA companies, they don't provide any infrastructure. They just say, here's a person, you provide the infrastructure, and we may give you some training, but that's about it. So we're trying to really make sure that the doctors and patients get taken care of. So because we use them too at our offices, so we want to make sure it's good.
Where would somebody find out about that? Is there a website?
Yeah, mybcat.com. That's mybcat.com. Or you can email me at ankit, ANKIT, at mybcat.com.
You'll be at the connection, right?
I will. Yeah, I'll
Talking
be there.
about
I'm actually
AI.
speaking. Yeah, well,
Okay.
not. I'd be happy to talk about AI. I'm actually talking about up leveling the practices using
Oh,
global
okay.
resources. Yeah.
I was part of the planning committee, and I think there was an AI on there, but we had a few others.
Yeah.
It's been a popular topic. So sorry to misrepresent you, but I'm sure you'll do a fantastic job with that as well. So yeah,
Well,
I'll see you in
yeah, next month actually. We'll see
next
each other
month.
in
Yeah, I'll
person.
see you there. So I'm looking forward to that. So thanks again, Ankit. Appreciate the time.
Thanks, Steve. Take care.
And I appreciate Ankit being here. And if you're listening, I hope to see you at the iDoc Connection, which is, if you're wondering what is that, that's the iDoc National Conference that we hold every year. And this year it's in Round Rock, Texas, which is right near Austin. So we can call it Austin, Texas, February 13th through 16th. So if you want to know more about that, you can check out our website at idoc.net. And we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.